If you had told me a year ago that the people I loved most would one day call me old and worthless, I would have laughed and shaken my head. I would have said, not my family, not my friends, not after everything I've done for them, but life has a way of humbling even the proudest hearts. And sometimes, the words that cut the deepest come from the mouths you once fed. My name is Walter Harris. I turned 70 last spring. Though most days I still feel like the young man who built his life from nothing in a small American town, I was never rich, never famous, but I was proud. I worked 35 years as a machinist at the local plant, raised 2 children with my late wife, and paid off every debt with my own hands. I believed in hard work, honesty, and the kind of loyalty that keeps a family together through every storm. But as the years passed, the world changed around me. The plant closed. The town shrank, and my children, Emily and Mark, moved away to chase bigger dreams. I stayed behind, tending the house my wife and I built, mowing the same patch of grass, fixing the same leaky faucet, and waiting for the phone to ring. Sometimes it did, more often. It didn't at first. I didn't mind the quiet. I filled my days with small routines: morning coffee on the porch, crossword puzzles, trips to the grocery store where the cashier still remembered my name. I volunteered at the library, helped neighbors with odd jobs, and tried to keep busy. But as the months turned into years, the silence grew heavier. The world seemed to move on without me. It started with little things. Emily would call and say, "Dad, you really shouldn't be living alone at your age." Mark would visit and sigh. "You're getting forgetful, Dad. Maybe it's time to think about assisted living." I'd laugh it off. But their words lingered. I began to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I was getting old. Maybe I was becoming a burden. Then came the day of Emily's birthday party. She invited me to her new house in the city, a place filled with glass and chrome, all sharp edges and cold light. I wore my best suit, the one my wife bought me for our 40th anniversary, and brought a homemade apple pie when I arrived. Emily's friends barely glanced at me. Mark was busy on his phone. I sat in the corner, listening to conversations about things I didn't understand: cryptocurrency, remote work, vegan diets. I felt invisible at dinner. Someone asked me what I did all day. Before I could answer, Emily laughed and said, "Dad just putters around the house. He's retired, you know. Not much use for anything else." The table erupted in polite laughter. I forced a smile, but inside something cracked. Later that night, as I was leaving, I overheard Mark talking to Emily in the kitchen. "He's getting old. He can barely remember things. I don't know why he insists on staying in that old house. He's just, well, he's kind of worthless now, isn't he?" Worthless. The word echoed in my mind all the way home. I sat in my car in the driveway, staring at the dark windows of the house I'd built with my own hands. I thought of my wife, gone 5 years now, and wondered what she would say if she could see me like this. Alone, dismissed, and labeled as nothing more than a burden. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest. I moved through the day in a fog, replaying their words over and over at the grocery store. The cashier asked if I needed help carrying my bags. At the library, a young volunteer offered to read to me, assuming I couldn't see well enough to do it myself. Everywhere I went, I felt the weight of my age pressing down on me, as if the world had decided I was finished. But the truth is, I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I started to notice things I hadn't before: the way people looked past me in line, the way neighbors spoke to me slowly, as if I were a child. Even my old friends at the diner seemed to have moved on, their conversations turning to ailments and regrets. I realized that somewhere along the way, I had become invisible, not just to my family, but to the world. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun set over the empty street, I thought about all the things I had done in my life, the machines I'd fixed, the problems I'd solved, the people I'd helped. I remembered the pride in my wife's eyes when I built her a new kitchen, the joy on Emily's face when I taught her to ride a bike, the way Mark used to brag about his super dad at school. I was not always old. I was not always invisible. But now, the people I loved most saw me as nothing more than a relic, a reminder of a world they had outgrown. They called me old and worthless, and for a while, I almost believed them, almost because, deep down, I knew something they didn't. I had a secret. A part of myself I had kept hidden. Even from my own children, it was a piece of my past. A skill I had honed in the quiet hours after work. A passion that had carried me through the darkest days. I had always told myself it was just a hobby, just a way to pass the time. But now, as I sat alone in the twilight, I realized it was more than that. It was my legacy, and it was about to change everything. The days after Emily's birthday party felt heavier than any winter I'd ever known. I moved through my routines, but the world seemed colder, the air thicker with judgment every time I looked in the mirror. I saw not the man who had built a life from scratch, but the old and worthless label my own children had stamped on me. It wasn't just Emily and Mark. The world seemed eager to remind me of my age. At the pharmacy, the young clerk spoke to me in a slow, exaggerated voice, as if I'd lost my hearing along with my youth. At the bank, the teller double-checked my signature, asking if I needed help remembering my PIN. Even the neighbors, who once waved and chatted over the fence, now offered awkward smiles and quick exits. As if my gray hair was contagious, I tried to brush it off, to remind myself that I was still the same Walter Harris who had fixed half the houses on this block, who had coached Little League and organized the annual 4th of July barbecue. But the more I tried to hold on to those memories, the more distant they felt. The world had moved on, and I was left behind. One afternoon, I decided to visit Mark. He lived in a sleek apartment downtown, all glass and steel. A far cry from the cozy home where he'd grown up. I brought a box of his childhood things. Old baseball cards, a trophy from his first science fair, a faded photo of the two of us fishing at Lake Erie. I thought maybe he'd like to remember where he came from. When I arrived, Mark barely looked up from his laptop. "Dad, you should have called. I'm in the middle of something." I set the box on the table. "I just thought you might want these. They're from when you were a kid." He glanced at the box. Then back at his screen. "You can just leave them. I'll look through them later." I sat down, hoping for a few minutes of conversation. But Mark was distracted, his answers short and impatient. After a while, he closed his laptop and sighed. "Dad, I know you mean well, but you can't just drop by like this." "I have a life, you know, things to do." I nodded. Swallowing the sting? "Of course I just wanted to see you." He stood up. "Already moving toward the door? I'll call you, okay? Maybe we can get lunch next week." I left the apartment feeling smaller than I had in years. The box of memories stayed on the table, untouched. Emily wasn't much better. She called once a week, always in a rush. Always with a list of things I should or shouldn't be doing. "Dad, are you taking your pills? Did you remember your doctor's appointment? You really shouldn't be driving anymore. It's not safe at your age." Her words, meant as concern, felt more like commands. I wanted to tell her I was fine, that I'd managed just fine before she was even born. But I bit my tongue, not wanting to start another argument. The worst was the day Emily and Mark came to visit together. They sat me down in the living room. "Their faces serious, Dad," Emily began. "We've been talking. We're worried about you living alone. The house is too big. And you're not as young as you used to be," Mark nodded. "There's a really nice assisted living place just outside town. They have activities, meals, nurses on staff. You'd be around people your own age." I looked at them, my own children, and saw not love, but pity. "I don't need a home," I said quietly. "This is my home," Emily reached for my hand. "Dad, we're just trying to help. You can't do everything by yourself anymore. It's time to let go." I pulled my hand away, anger rising in my chest. "I'm not helpless." "I don't need to be put away like an old piece of furniture," Mark sighed. "We're not saying you're helpless, Dad, but you're not. You're not who you used to be." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I watched them leave, their voices fading down the driveway for the first time in my life. I felt truly alone that night. I sat in my workshop, the small shed behind the house where I'd spent countless hours tinkering, building, fixing. The walls were lined with tools, the shelves cluttered with half-finished projects. It was the one place that still felt like mine. I ran my hands over the worn workbench. remembering the nights I'd spent here with Mark, teaching him how to sand a piece of wood, how to drive a nail straight. I remembered Emily sitting on the floor, painting birdhouses in wild colors, her laughter echoing through the yard. Those days felt like another lifetime. I stared at the pile of old wood in the corner, the stack of blueprints I'd drawn up over the years. I thought about the secret I'd kept hidden, the skill I'd honed in the quiet hours after work. I'd always told myself it was just a hobby, just a way to keep my hands busy, but now, as I sat alone in the dim light, I wondered if maybe it was something more. Maybe it was the one thing I had left the next morning. I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I made a pot of coffee, pulled on my old work boots, and headed out to the shed. I dusted off the blueprints, sorted through the wood, and began to work. At first it was slow going. My hands were stiff, my back ached. But as the hours passed, I found my rhythm. The smell of sawdust filled the air. The sound of the hammer echoed in my ears. I lost myself in the work, forgetting the words that had haunted me for weeks. As the days went by, I poured my heart into the project. I worked late into the night, the shed glowing with warm light. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. It was my secret, my way of proving to myself, if no one else, that I was still worth something. And as the project took shape, so did a new sense of hope. Maybe I couldn't change the way the world saw me. Maybe I couldn't make Emily and Mark understand. But I could remind myself, and maybe, just maybe, remind them of who I really was. I was not old and worthless. I was Walter Harris. And I was just getting started. The days blurred together as I poured myself into my secret project. Each morning, I woke with a sense of anticipation. Eager to get back to the shed, the ache in my joints and the stiffness in my back faded into the background, replaced by the satisfaction of creation. For the first time in a long while, I felt alive. I worked with a focus I hadn't known in years. My hands, though slower than they once were, still remembered the old skills. I measured and cut, sanded and stained. Fitting each piece together with care, the project was ambitious. More ambitious than anything I'd attempted since my retirement, but I was determined to see it through. As the weeks passed, the shed became my sanctuary. I kept the door locked, not out of fear, but to protect the one thing that was still truly mine. I didn't answer the phone when Emily called, and I let Mark's texts go unanswered. I needed this time for myself, to remember the man I used to be one afternoon. As I was fitting the final pieces together, I heard a knock at the front door. I wiped my hands on my jeans and made my way inside. It was Mrs. Jenkins from next door, holding a plate of cookies. Walter, I haven't seen you around much lately. Everything all right? She asked, her eyes full of concern. I smiled, accepting the cookies, just keeping busy, Martha. Working on a little project? She nodded. Her curiosity piqued. You always were good with your hands. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cookies. I realized how much I'd withdrawn from the world, how much I'd let the words of others define me, but as I looked out the window at the shed, I felt a surge of pride. I was doing something for myself, something that mattered. The project neared completion. I spent hours perfecting the details, making sure every joint was tight, every surface smooth. I remembered the lessons my father had taught me in his own workshop. Measure twice, cut once. Take pride in your work. Never rush a job worth doing. Those lessons had carried me through a lifetime of challenges. And now, they guided me once more one evening. As I was putting the finishing touches on the project, I heard voices outside. I peeked through the window and saw Emily and Mark standing in the driveway, their faces tense. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to face them, but something inside me shifted. I wiped the sawdust from my hands and stepped outside. Dad, we've been trying to reach you, Emily said, her voice tight with worry. You haven't answered your phone. We were starting to get concerned. Mark nodded, glancing at the shed. What have you been up to out here? I shrugged, a small smile tugging at my lips. Just working on something, needed a little time to myself. Emily sighed, her frustration clear. "Dad, you can't just shut us out. We're your family." "We're only trying to help." I looked at them. Really looked at them and saw not malice, but fear. Fear of losing me. Fear of the unknown. Fear of their own aging. I realized that their words, as hurtful as they had been, came from a place of love twisted by worry. "I know you're trying to help," I said quietly, "but sometimes the best way to help is to let someone stand on their own 2 feet. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "We just want you to be safe, Dad. You're not as young as you used to be," I smiled. A genuine smile this time? Maybe not, but I'm not done yet. They exchanged a glance. Unsure how to respond, I could see the doubt in their eyes. The uncertainty, but I didn't let it shake me. I had found my purpose again, and I wasn't about to let it go. After they left, I returned to the shed, my heart lighter than it had been in months. I worked late into the night, driven by a sense of urgency. I wanted to finish before anyone else could try to stop me. The next morning, I stood back and admired my work. It was beautiful, a handcrafted rocking chair. Made from the finest oak I could find, every curve, every joint, every detail was a testament to a lifetime of skill and patience. I ran my hand over the smooth armrest, feeling the warmth of the wood beneath my fingers. But the chair was just the beginning. I had plans for more tables, cabinets, even a small boat like the one my father and I had built when I was a boy. I realized that my secret wasn't just my skill with wood. It was my ability to create, to build, to leave something lasting behind. I decided it was time to share my work with the world. I took photos of the chair and posted them online, joining a community of woodworkers who shared tips, stories, and encouragement. The response was overwhelming. People from all over the country commented on my craftsmanship, asking if I took commissions, if I could teach them, if I had more pieces to sell. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as an old man, not as a burden, but as an artist, a craftsman, a creator. The words "old and worthless" faded into the background. Replaced by messages of admiration and respect, I started taking orders, building pieces for people who appreciated the time and care I put into my work. The shed became a workshop, a place of business, a sanctuary. I hired a local teenager to help with deliveries, teaching him the basics of woodworking along the way. I found joy in passing on my knowledge, in seeing the spark of pride in his eyes. As the weeks turned into months, my reputation grew. People came from neighboring towns to see my work, to shake my hand, to thank me for reminding them that age is not a curse, but a badge of honor. And all the while, Emily and Mark watched from the sidelines, their disbelief slowly turning to awe. They had called me old and worthless, but my secret was changing everything. The day my secret truly changed everything began like any other. I was in the shed, sanding the edge of a new table. When I heard a car pull into the driveway, I glanced out the window and saw Emily and Mark stepping out, both dressed a little too nicely for a casual visit. They looked nervous, glancing at each other as they approached the house. I wiped my hands and met them at the door. Emily was the first to speak. "Dad, we wanted to talk. There's something important we need to discuss." Mark nodded, his eyes darting to the shed. "We've noticed you've been busy. People in town are talking about your woodworking. Some of our friends have even seen your pieces online." I felt a flicker of pride, but I kept my voice steady. "I've been keeping myself occupied. It's good to have a purpose." Emily hesitated, then blurted out, "Dad, you're trending on social media. Did you know that? There's a post about your rocking chair with thousands of likes. People are calling you an inspiration." I blinked. Surprised, I'd seen the comments online, but I hadn't realized how far my work had spread. Mark pulled out his phone and showed me a video someone had taken at the local craft fair, where I'd displayed a few of my pieces. The video had gone viral. People were sharing it, praising my skill, my story, my age-defying passion. "We had no idea," Emily said softly. "We thought you were just passing time. We didn't realize you were building something so special." I shrugged, a small smile tugging at my lips. I've always loved working with my hands. I just never had the time before. Now I do, Mark looked at me, his expression a mix of guilt and admiration. Dad, we're sorry. We underestimated you. We let our own fears get in the way of seeing who you really are. I nodded, accepting their apology. It's easy to forget that people don't stop being themselves just because they get older. I may have slowed down, but I'm still me. Emily's eyes filled with tears. We called you old and worthless. I'm so sorry, Dad. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. But I didn't know how to help. I reached out and took her hand. You don't have to help me by taking away my independence. Just be there. That's all I need. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Jenkins, holding a flyer, Walter. The community center wants to feature your work in their annual art show. They say you're the talk of the town. Emily and Mark exchanged amazed glances. I felt a surge of pride, not just for myself, but for the journey I'd taken to get here. The man they'd called old and worthless was now being celebrated by the very community that had once overlooked him. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The local newspaper ran a story about me, calling me the craftsman of Maple Street. Orders poured in from all over the state. People stopped me in the grocery store to shake my hand, to thank me for showing them that life doesn't end at retirement. The art show at the community center was the highlight. My rocking chair, table, and cabinets were displayed front and center. Surrounded by a crowd of admirers, Emily and Mark stood by my side. Beaming with pride, Max, my grandson, ran from piece to piece, telling anyone who would listen, "My grandpa made that." During the show, a reporter asked me what inspired me to start woodworking so late in life. I looked at Emily and Mark, then at Max, and smiled. Sometimes, when the world tells you you're finished, you have to remind them and yourself that you're just getting started. Age is just a number. Worth is something you carry inside. The applause that followed was thunderous. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Not as an old man, not as a burden, but as a creator, a teacher, a father, and a friend. After the show, Emily hugged me tightly. "Dad, I'm so proud of you. I'm sorry for ever doubting you." Mark shook my hand, his grip firm. "You taught us a lesson we'll never forget," I smiled, feeling the weight of their words lift the last of the bitterness from my heart. We all have something to give, no matter our age, sometimes. It just takes a little longer for others to see it that night. As I sat on the porch with Max curled up beside me, I thought about the journey I'd taken. The pain of being called old and worthless had been real, but it had also pushed me to rediscover my own value. My secret, my passion, my skill, my determination had changed everything, and in doing so, it had changed the people around me too. Asterisk, the weeks after the art show felt like a new chapter in my life. The phone rang more often, not just with orders for my woodworking, but with invitations from neighbors, old friends, and even strangers who wanted to meet the craftsman of Maple Street for the first time in years. I felt not just seen, but celebrated. Emily and Mark visited more frequently, but the tone of their visits had changed. There was no more talk of assisted living or what I couldn't do. Instead, they asked about my latest projects, brought Max to spend weekends in the workshop, and even helped me set up a small website to showcase my work. Emily, who once worried about me using power tools, now proudly told her friends about her father's creations. Mark, who had once dismissed my hobbies, started asking for advice on fixing things around his own home one Saturday. Max and I were building a birdhouse together when he looked up at me, his eyes wide with admiration. "Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to be just like you." The words filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I realized that the respect I'd earned wasn't just from the community or my children. It was from the next generation, too. The community center invited me to teach a weekly woodworking class. At first I was nervous. What could an old man like me teach a room full of eager faces? But as I stood in front of the class, sharing the skills I'd honed over a lifetime, I saw the same spark in their eyes that I'd once seen in my own. Young and old, men and women, all eager to learn, to create, to build something with their own hands. The class became more than just a lesson in woodworking. It became a place where stories were shared, friendships were formed, and respect was given freely. People who had once overlooked me now sought my advice, valued my opinion, and thanked me for inspiring them to try something new. Emily and Mark attended the first class, sitting quietly in the back. Afterward, Emily hugged me, tears in her eyes. "Dad, I had no idea how much you had to offer." "I'm sorry for ever doubting you." Mark shook my hand, his voice thick with emotion. "You showed us all that it's never too late to make a difference." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. We all have something to give, Mark, sometimes. It just takes a little longer for others to see it as the seasons changed. So did my life. The house that once felt empty was now filled with laughter. The shed that had been my refuge became a place of community. I found myself looking forward to each new day, eager to see what I could create, who I could help, and what new lessons I might learn one evening. As I sat on the porch watching the sun set, Emily joined me. She handed me a letter, an invitation to speak at the local high school's graduation ceremony. "They want you to talk about resilience, about finding purpose at any age," she said. Pride shining in her eyes, I accepted, and on the day of the ceremony, I stood before a room full of young faces, their futures wide open. I told them my story. Not just of being called old and worthless, but of rediscovering my worth, of finding new purpose, and of the power of never giving up on yourself. If you ever feel invisible, I told them, if you ever feel like the world has moved on without you, remember this: your value isn't determined by your age, your job, or what others say about you. It's determined by what you carry inside, your skills, your kindness, your willingness to keep growing. No matter what, the applause was thunderous, but the real reward came afterward. When students and parents approached me to share their own stories, their own struggles, and their own hopes for the future. As I walked home that night, I thought about the journey I'd taken. The pain of being dismissed, the loneliness of feeling invisible, the struggle to prove my worth. But I also thought about the joy of rediscovery, the pride of accomplishment, and the love that had grown stronger through adversity. Emily and Mark walked beside me, Max skipping ahead, his laughter echoing in the evening air. I realized that respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you earn. One day at a time, by living with dignity, by refusing to give up, and by believing in yourself even when others don't. I had been called old and worthless, but my secret, my passion, my skill, my refusal to fade quietly into the background, had changed everything. And in the end, I discovered that the greatest respect comes not from others, but from within. If you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever been told you're too old, too slow, or not enough, remember this: your story isn't over. Sometimes the best chapters come when you least expect them. This was my lesson, this was my legacy, and it was one I would never forget.